Hey everyone, coming to you live from the Redwoods. I am recording our lecture for Tuesday, June 29th, and our topic today is, in scare quotes, again, Northern California Indigenous cultures. So I'm using scare quotes here because, of course, Northern California. Uh, North is a direction that not all indigenous groups acknowledge or understand it to be that way. For example, the Yurok, which we will be talking about today, um, and frankly many other indigenous groups, at least that I know of, also orient themselves around more of the local geography. Californian is also included in these scare quotes because, of course, California is a newer term, especially for groups who have been living in the area for, thousands of years, whereas California has only had, you know, its title as such. This land has only been known as California for only 171 years. So, just as a reminder, week 2 is all asynchronous. These lectures are going to be posted by Sunday. Woohoo! Remember that Monday is also an acknowledgement of and an observation of Juneteenth. So, you do not have to do anything until Tuesday, and hopefully, you are watching this on Tuesday. Um, so lectures will be posted on Sunday. Weekly responses will also be posted then as well, and I will answer email within 24 hours. I don't see anything happening, barring something awful that would keep me from answering within 24 hours. Um, if it is longer than 48 hours, maybe be concerned, but I'll probably be okay. I will make sure to have email connection as frequently as I can, but I promise I will be fine. And hopefully nothing will be too pressing that you'll need automatic or as quick as possible feedback back. But things happen, and hopefully nothing bad happens to me, and I will answer your email within 24 hours. So we talked about the scare quotes within, Northern California. We also have to talk about the term Native American. So this term can work, and it is technically correct. Native, invokes this idea of having always been here. And while we know from last week, nobody has always been here or really anywhere. If we take a really big, long, deep scientific historical view, but generally speaking, much longer than, you know, these quote unquote Native Americans, these people who have been along in this land now known as California or now known as America, have have been around longer than the terms California or America. But there's still some problems with this. And I think the biggest problem that we have to acknowledge is that not all folks who would be considered Native American like this term. Some groups prefer to be called Indigenous. Some folks prefer to be called First Nation. Some folks do like the term Indian, spelled out, Indian. That term, of course, coming from Columbus's mistake, thinking that he was in India. Others have chosen to try to take, or not try to, actually take back that term and, but spell it out NDN, so Indian. Um, Others prefer just to be called by the name of their group. So today we'll be talking about the Yurok. Uh, they would prefer to be called Yurok. Some others prefer just their names. And I think that this is the biggest thing that we can get from this is that you should call people as they would like to be called and by their name when you can. Um, but there are also bigger issues with this term, Native American. So, perhaps they don't like this term because it relates them to America, which led to their experience of generational trauma from colonization, settlement, and genocide. For some, it is the term native that is an issue. Native has been used as a slur meaning something that has been thrown back at a group in a derogatory manner to make them feel shame. For others, there is a concern for safety that has led to many historically dropping this title altogether and assimilating into another culture, depending on their location. It could be, of preferring the term American for, especially in Southern California, as we will talk about in the next lecture, that uh, could be, they could, prefer to be uh, Chicano, Chicana, let Latinx, many other things. It really just depends. But and then of course the other issue is that America doesn't it comes from the name of an uh, Italian man named Amerigo Vespucci, and he has two continents named after him, and that is a lot. So there are a lot of issues that come with naming, and I think it is something to always be cognizant of, and when you can be as specific as possible. I think it's also a really good reminder to not make any generalizations as to who who should be doing what, who ought to be called what. People, even if they're in the same broader group or community, not everybody prefers the same title or sees their identity in the same way. And all of those things, all of those reactions are correct. People and how they understand their experiences should always be respected and should always be acknowledged. And you find that out by asking folks in a very respectful and humble and open and ultimately lovingly way. So this is also related to this idea of Indigenous futurity, which I will talk, I will remind us again next lecture too, but always looking forward. So this is a more recent movement within the last 10 or so years, really coming out of the Afrofuturism movement, from sci-fi and now also in art and music. See, for example, uh, J- um, Janae Monet. Uh, man, I'm forgetting that song. Is it okay, computer? It's so good. Anyways, if you know, you know. You're able to pick up the notes from my brain. Um, Other examples, probably more well understood of Afrofuturism would of course be Black Panther and the vision of Wakanda that the comics the and of course the movie portrays. So Indigenous futurity related to this. This is a movement, again, in art, literature, comics, games, other media. The first form of Indigenous futurity comes from an anthology called Walking in the Clouds, an anthology of Indigenous science fiction that came out in 2013. So all of these futurity movements are using tools of art to create representations, and in the case of Indigenous futurity, representations of Indigenous autonomy to critique Indigenous exclusion from the present. And like I said, this is related to Afrofuturism and also Chicana futurism. All of these movements are super duper awesome, interesting, and inspiring, even if, and potentially in some ways, especially if you don't belong to these groups. Of course, these futures are beautiful and safe spaces for the folks in these groups, but as an outsider, there is much to learn from these representations, and I encourage you to uh, to look into them. I wish I was. I haven't had my coffee yet, so you all don't you all don't know how absent scatterbrained I can be when I have not had my coffee, because I usually have coffee. I'm usually at least 2 or 3 cups in before class. So sorry, I am blanking. Is it okay, computer? Oh, it's such a good jam. Janae Monet, just so good, so good. Look, I will mention it in the next lecture because I'm recording it right after this. So I had you listen to Benjamin Madley's talk on his book, American Genocide, the United States California Indian Catastrophe. So genocide is a really heavy term, and I don't mean heavy just in what it connotes, but um, or sorry, what it denotes, which means that the denotation of genocide literally means, the explosive violence towards a culture to try to erase it completely. But also the connotation of it is very heavy as well. The ideas surrounding it brings with it not only an understanding of wrongdoing, but also legal precedent. So, genocide is a term by Raphael Lemkin. He uses it in 1944 to describe the expansion of Europe during World War II. So, he says colonization is intrinsically genocidal. So, when the UN forms after World War II, as these different countries, these United Nations, are trying to make sense of the world after 2 world wars. Um, they use it to describe what happened in World War II. Um, it is it is in this moment that it becomes a legal term and also a historic term, which means that we have this idea that originates in the 1940s coming out of a specific event. And there can be, and there has been, a lot of pushback to apply it to anything that happens before this time. Because generally speaking, historians want to understand the past in the past terms. That can get a little sticky. It can get a little complicated because, of course, there were lots of horrible things that happened in the past. There were lots of people who weren't recognized as people in the past, and what do you make from that, and how do you tell uh, the story of the past that potentially has kept certain groups of people from having a future or moving forward the future. And so, with all of this being said, again, to just connect this back to futurity, is that, through art and media, but also just through Indigenous people still living and thriving and being themselves, being Chumash, being Yurok, being Tongva, as we will talk about tomorrow, being any other group, being them as themselves, as their ancestors' wildest dreams. Super duper empowering, and something that we should always be thinking of, that these groups that we're talking about, at least in these 2 days, but many of the groups that we will not be talking today, are still alive, still around, not in the past, but in the present and future, and something that I frankly think that we should always be thinking about in history. History is not just the stories of the past, but they're the stories of the past that we use to build the present and future. Um, oh, and then of course, using genocide is useful because it does some heavy lifting. It can acknowledge the pain and destruction that led to generational trauma that present Indigenous folks are experiencing. It also acknowledges that cultural erasure is violence, really meaning that you can kill someone even if they are left breathing. So in the 19th and 20th centuries, there was this idea to kill the Indian and save the man. And using this idea of genocide, using this framework of understanding what that violence meant, uh, helps especially people outside of these groups to understand that someone can die but still be left alive, that people are much more than uh, their meat suit, like eating and breathing and drinking and walking around, that there is much more to us and that there are many more ways to die than to have our meat suit stop working, so to speak. So today we're going to be talking a bit about the Yurok. If you are interested in the topic, Benjamin Madley's book, An American Genocide, the introduction does and its first chapter does a lot of deep diving into the Yurok and the the history of of their genocide, in a sense, not complete erasure. They are still around, and one of the biggest federally recognized groups, at least in California, but it might also be one of the largest in the US. Still around, still thriving, but not without a lot of a lot of U.S. and state, so state of California, mandated violence, and also the only word I can really think of is the U.S. and California have done served as speed bumps to the movement of the Yurok, and we will get to that in a little bit. So this is a look at the Yurok land. It goes from right around here. So this is approximately where Redwood National Park is, which is how I learned about this group. And it goes all the way here. So it cuts the state line. The Yurok, which we will be talking about there, are today are primarily there, and the Turok, their sibling group, is on the other side of the river in the Klamath Falls area of Oregon. So, a little bit about the Yurok cosmology. So, cosmology is how they understand the world, it, partially their religion, but really just worldview. And so, from their worldview, drawn here by a geographer named Waterman in the late 19th century, 1920, the Yuroks live at the center of a cosmos surrounded by the ocean and belted, so cut through by the Klamath River. This is also defined in their geography, and their cardinal directions run upriver and downriver. So on a Mercator map, so on a map that the Global West tends to use, this the Yurok map runs northeast to southwest rather than our north to south. And I should say "our" being, again, Global West. Sorry, didn't mean to have that slip. Further, so salmon are gifts from the gods. So Chinook salmon are found in the Klamath River and in the ocean, and they are just gifts from the gods. When the salmon return home to spawn every year, the Yurok had rules regarding where they could fish and when to ensure sustainably consistent numbers for years to come. They also make offerings to the gods through ceremonies requiring singing and speaking with the Nepowo, the salmon leader. So they would have a specifically chosen leader who would commune with the salmon. Again, just highlight salmon, very important. While Sir Francis Drake did not meet the Yurok, he is the first um, European to enter the area. So he was born in 1540, died in 1596. And he landed in Northern California, but much south of the Yurok, much closer to what is now San Francisco. And he named the land New Albion, or Nova Albion, and presented it to Queen Elizabeth I of England. New Albion basically is a different way of saying New England. Albion is another word that was used to describe England. And for the most part, he had peaceful interactions with the Miwok people. Uh, However, he didn't really encounter them too much. This was just a trip. And he had other places to go, places to see, and tried and places to seize on behalf of Queen Elizabeth I. The first um, the first white person, frankly, to enter Yurok territory is Jedediah Smith, and he was born in 1799. He died in 1831. You can see that he did not have a very long life. Um, and he was a major explorer. He was American, and really helped with Western migration. He was a traveler, he was a cartographer. He tried to map out um, these lands that were west of what was then considered the United States of America. And one of his biggest accomplishments is that he discovered the South Pass as a point to cross the Continental Divide during the Oregon Trail. He was also the first white person in Sierra Nevada, Great Basin Desert, and much of California. And he has Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park named after him. He did encounter the Yurok, um, but I believe Madley talks about how that goes in the video. Um, yeah, he is the first but not the last of white folks to come to the area, because of course gold is found in what is now Northern California, before it's even considered Northern California in 1848, around San Francisco and much higher up. For example, south, just a mile or two south of the Klamath Reservation today. There's an area called Gold Bluffs. So you can guess by the name that gold was found there. Um, yeah, so Jedediah Smith, first white guy in the area. And with that, after him, like I said, many others follow. And eventually, as logging becomes a bigger industry in their area, in this area of now at this time Northern California, there's lots of logging. But there's also lots of fishing because you have to be able to feed all of these loggers and all of these people who are coming in and urbanizing, um, and settling in different parts of this now new state. And so the fish canning industry came to Northern California in 1876. Um, but it didn't last too long. It moved to Alaska in 1933. So as soon as that happened, and again, that move was just um, had nothing to do with anything except money. Uh, the business that ran the different factories, it was all one business, and they decided to move to Alaska because there was gold and also oil to be found over there. Um, but as soon as that business left, the state of California took back their quote unquote rights over the Klamath River. So this meant that the river, which again was and is so important to the Yurok, became went back to the state of California, and they regulated it on a local and county level on behalf of the state. So, because of the local connection between people in the area, they know each other. Um, they may even have dinner together or go to church together. However, because there's local connection, county officers, for the most part, turned a blind eye to Yurok fishing on the river, especially if they were given some Chinook salmon or a meal to take home. Um, there are diaries by both Yurok and uh, early 20th century like Euro American settlers in Klamath, so Humboldt and Del Norte counties. Um, where they talk about these kind of exchanges. So the Yurok would fish to feed their families, and they would also sell the fish to local Humboldt and Del Norte County communities. This was, for the most part, their main way of living, the main way that different Yurok families would be able to feed their families, not only with the fish, but also with um, with money from sales to get other things besides fish. It was also hard for many Yurok to find jobs because of racism and, beliefs against Indigenous folks about how they would work on a job, how they would be able to do anything, basically. So this kind of agreement, but at the local county level, started to change in 1969 when Raymond Matz, a 26-year-old Yurok, had 5 gill nets. So this is a traditional Yurok fishing tool, and these were seized by the California Fish and Game wardens. So Matz sued the wardens to get his nets, and not only did he not get back his nets, but the state courts actually ruled that the Klamath River Reservation, where he had fished, where he had been allowed to fish, had apparently been terminated by Congress in 1892. So he went to court just to get his property back. And the court was like, oh, well, actually, you weren't able to fish there because the reservation that you thought existed didn't exist at all. So this ruling, of course, meant more than gill nets, and the Matz family took it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1974, um, who the court ultimately found that the reservation had never been terminated and was still part of Indian country. And Indian country is a legal term, meant that the land was under Indian law, or different groups presiding law. So this is an example of a gillnet. There are environmental folks who do not like this form of fishing because they think that it is inhumane, that it hurts the fish. Um, Others say that it's actually fine. It does not hurt them. Um, I am more personally in the group of I don't eat fish. I do not have an opinion. I am also not Yurok, so I also do not have an opinion. But there are many other opinions that lie somewhere on that spectrum of hating this practice and wanting to stop it at all costs, to doing this practice and not only doing it to survive, but and because it's part of their culture, but because they enjoy doing it. There is no right or wrong answer to this, but this is necessary context to kind of think about for any cultural practice, especially if it's for a group that you are not part of. It is something to consider and just think think back about and I don't know, just wonder. So this ruling led to a lot of protest, especially in the 70s, there in the Pacific Northwest broadly. So, not just in Northern California, but going down all the way to San Francisco and going all the way up north to Alaska. There was, these fishing wars. And so, here is an example of Yurok protest on the Klamath. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle. And on August 12th, 1978, you can see Yurok youth saying moratorium, so a moratorium against fishing, hell no. And this went on for a whole summer. This went on for a while. The fishing wars lasted decades. So this was only one example in about a 20-year span. And of course, throughout the world, especially when it comes to fishing, there are still wars that are being held today. Different either environmental groups or governing bodies who try to control the extraction, so fishing or hunting of animals that have traditionally sustained different indigenous groups. And I I do not know when that would stop. This has been a constant battle, especially in conservation and preservation. So generally speaking, when you are in a national park, for example, you are on land that has had similar kinds of fights. So all of when thinking about the Yurok, we have and their protest, their fish war in 1978. They did something called fish-ins. So every night for the summer of 1978, a group of at least 15 Yurok would go on the Klamath River for a fish-in. So this was borrowing from the civil rights movement and other peaceful protest groups' sit-in strategy. So direct action that was still nonviolent. The sit-in strategy, the Yurok would place woven together nets of the Klamath. Because they were woven together, they would not catch anything. So they technically weren't fishing. And every night, police in California, fish and wildlife game wardens would watch them. Um, this led to some really violent uh, experiences, but especially on the side of the Yurok, many Raymond Matz included that I mentioned earlier, were punched, kicked. There was a woman who was thrown across across a boat. There were issues of sexual harassment, and again, especially against uh, like female presenting Yurok. It was bloody and it was horrible. Oh, I'm sorry, the text is really bad for this. I'm sorry. So this is Cecil Andrus. He was the U.S. Secretary of Interior at the time. Basically, so the Secretary of the Interior is in charge of all federally owned uh, lands. the Klamath River at this time, part of it was under his jurisdiction. And he had the ultimate say over how the Yurok could fish, where they could fish, why they could fish, how much they could fish, etc. And he tried to go to a salmon dinner to uh, try to make some peace with the Yurok. Of course, it was a publicity stunt. Of course, it was not necessarily done in good faith. It was more to benefit him and to try to make the Iraq, just kind of simmer down and stop creating trouble. So Raymond Matz, who we saw earlier in a few slides, he put his finger very deep into Andrus's chest to tell him that he was wrong and what he was doing. And very quickly, the Secretary of the Interior was taken out of there by helicopter very quickly, and missed his salmon dinner, but ultimately it worked out for the Yurok, and they have special arrangements so that they can fish in the river. However, there are really big issues with the river. So they have this area that they can land. They have this special area that they can fish. They have parts of their reservation. However, because of industrial pollution and hydraulic damming, the Klamath River is very polluted, and that has led to multiple fish kills. The biggest one was in 2002, where the Klamath River lost 34,000 Chinook salmon just in that summer. Just massive fish death, which of course, massive death also leads to more diseases. The area is very polluted from different canning industries that have since come back to the area. But even more than that, different recreation practices, especially boats polluting, and the damming especially has made it so that the river can't clean itself. So that is lecture for today. I'm going to stop recording, but I'm going to say can't wait for the next lecture, which you will see maybe right after this. And I will tell you the name of the song that I was thinking of. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye.